Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you all keeping well. If you are new here, hello, hi, you're very welcome. I promise I will look after you. My name's Liz. I am not an historian. I'm just someone who's extremely passionate about history and I love to share all of that with all of you. So last week we saw John be the hero. He rescued his mum. Good on you, John. Well done. But we know that's not going to last, don't we? Yes. So let's find out what John's doing now. Let's go. John has rescued his mother Eleanor of Aquitaine from Mirabeau Castle from the clutches of his nephew Arthur. Now John has all the prisoners in chains and he parades them for 250 miles north from Mirabeau all the way to Normandy. And he gleefully writes to his English nobles that he's captured 200 knights, all of the leading rebels, including his own nephew Arthur of Brittany. Even William Marshal gloats to the Lusignans that is what happens to troublemakers. Now John has decided that he wants to make an example of the rebels. Arthur, he's sent off to be imprisoned in a number of castles and ends up in Rouen. Hugh de Lusignan is locked up in Caen and 25 others are put on ships and sent off to the dungeons of Corfe Castle in Dorset. Now, this isn't the house arrest that John's father did to his mother for 15 years or what John himself has done to his own ex-wife, Isabella of Gloucester. This is heavy chains, no visitors, maximum security, and if you're very lucky, some bread and water. John wants them to suffer both physically and emotionally. Now, John's qual streak is really starting to come out, but so is his incompetence. If John had put his prisoners under lock and key and used that to negotiate peace with their families and Philip Augustus, then John would have done well. But John doesn't do that. Instead, he creates a whole different crisis almost immediately after Mirabeau with the two men that's by his side after capturing Arthur, Hugh de Lusignan, and the others. Those men are William de Roche and William de Bruce. I hope I pronounced those right. Now, they asked John whether they could have the honour of deciding where Arthur is locked up once Arthur has been handed over to them and in what conditions he's to be left in. But as soon as John has Arthur in his grips, he completely snubs them both. Now, William de Roche, he takes a huge offence to this, and within a few months, he rebels against John. John, in return, he confiscates his land, and almost overnight, another armed conflict blows up on the borders of Aquitaine. Now, with this new threat, John tries to make it up to the Lusignans and gets them back on his side by releasing Hugh. But it just makes things a whole lot worse. Now, for a short while, Aquitaine was safe, but now it's on the verge of being lost from the Plantagenet Empire completely. And if you think things couldn't get any worse, or John couldn't get any worse, they do. So, on a side note, John also imprisoned Arthur's sister, his niece, Eleanor, but Eleanor was treated well by John. Eleanor had two Scottish princesses as companions, and the royal ladies lived in some style and comfort. Eleanor also received presents of saddles and reins, which was a sign that she must have been allowed some freedom even as a prisoner. Back in England at Corfe Castle in Dorset, the prisoners that John sent there tried to break out. They overpowered the guards and took control of the central tower. Now, John's troops, they surrounded the tower and they blockade it. No one is allowed in or out, and no food is allowed in. Now, within weeks, 22 of those prisoners, who were all young men, they were all aged under 25, I believe, they all starved to death. Now, even in medieval times, that is a horrific thing to do, and it certainly does not help John's reputation. Now, things get a little bit complicated when it comes to Arthur of Brittany. If John had Arthur killed, then he would be in much more trouble than he's already in. But Arthur was once Richard's official heir, and he has a huge amount of supporters. But for John, Arthur will always be a threat to his throne. So having Arthur released is just out of the question. The most sensible thing to do would be to send Arthur to an isolated castle in England, treat him well, and make sure he doesn't stir up any trouble. But we all know that that doesn't happen. In 1203, only a year after being captured, Arthur disappears. There's so many different theories to what happened to Arthur. There's some say that he was starved to death. Others say that he died of disease. But the one that seems to make the most sense, and it fits the events, but the one that goes on, oh dear, is one that John was majorly pissed at his nephew. And he asked one of his men to have Arthur blinded and castrated. In medieval England, no one would really batter an eyelid at that, but in Normandy, it's not the done thing. And John's henchman, he can't do it. And he spares Arthur and tells everyone that Arthur died of his injuries, in the hopes that John just simply wouldn't care and the people of Brittany would have to do as they're told. But when they hear the rumour, they announced John as a murderer. So what does John do? From a chronicle that's compiled in Marjon Abbey in Wales, it's one of the best sources that tells us, and the source is by William de Bruce, one of the men who helped capture Arthur, and he was also a henchman for John. Now, William wrote that after John had captured Arthur and kept him in prison for some time, and on the Thursday before Easter, John was very drunk and possessed by the devil. John murdered Arthur with his bare hands. He then went on to say that John tied a heavy stone to the body and dropped Arthur's teenage body into the River Seine. Now, after his body was then discovered by a fisherman who took the boy's body to a priory for a secret burial, as the fisherman was scared of John the tyrant. Arthur was buried at Bec. Now, if the chronicle is right, and there's quite a few reasons to believe that it is, John murdered his nephew in a drunken rage. John was never formally charged with Arthur's murder, but once it became known that Arthur is dead, John's reign is plunged deep into darkness. And the one question is, can John keep hold of his crown? In the early spring of 1204, John is up against his first real military task since he became king. Chateau Gaillard, which was Richard the Lionheart's magnificent castle in Normandy, has been under siege by the French king Philip Augustus for months, and slowly the French army has been chipping away at its defences. Chateau Gaillard stands on the north of the River Seine, and when Philip first arrived, he had a pontoon bridge built across the river, so his army could encircle the castle from all sides and to stop all food and supplies from going in. Now, when John realised that Chateau Gaillard was in trouble, he sent his best man for the job, none other than William Marshal, and several thousand troops, all marching by night, accompanied by a fleet of war galleys who were rowing up the river. Now, William Marshal, he done his job, he done what he was sent for, but the men in the boat couldn't keep up as they hadn't realised just how strong the river currents were. So the mission failed. And all while that was going on, Philip Augustus had sent miners to dig out the castle's foundations and bombard the castle walls with trebuchets, like catapults. Now, sections of the castle has been falling, and now all the occupants are in the compound, and those miners who were digging, they were digging up through the toilet chute. Not the most glamorous, but it worked. Now, once they were up the top of the chute, those men, they burst into the guardrobe, fighting their way into a chapel upstairs. Now, they set fire to those chapel doors, and in all of the confusion, with people running around, they ran out into the courtyard and they opened a gate, and the French soldiers waiting on the other side came rushing in and pushed the defenders back even further. Now, the only thing that could save them now was if John himself came to their rescue with a giant army behind him, surprising the French army, just like when he rescued his mother, Eleanor, at Mirabeau. But John is nowhere to be seen. Just as the greatest fortress any of the Plantagenets ever built crumbles and the French army sets fire to its buildings. Now, Normandy has been joined to England since John's great-great-grandfather's time, William the Conqueror, in 1066. Normandy has been at the heart of the Plantagenet Empire for the past 50 years, and now it could all be gone up in a puff of smoke. Philip Augustus is raging an all-out war on John and hitting him wherever he can, not just with Chateau Gaillard and Normandy, he's also attacking Anjou and Aquitaine, but Normandy is the main one. It's the richest and the most important lands in the Plantagenet realm. But why is Philip attacking John? John signed the Treaty of Le Goulet in 1200, which meant Philip could intervene in what should be internal Plantagenet disputes. Now, when John snatched the fiancée of a French lord and caused outrage when he allowed important prisoners to die, and suspicions are growing that something very, very bad has happened to John's nephew and the rival for the throne, Arthur of Brittany. No one's been able to prove anything, but the longer it goes without any sign of Arthur, the worse it looks on John. And with all of that, has given Philip the perfect excuse to get some Plantagenet lands into French hands. Philip passionately believes in one single goal: a united France under his leadership and having the Plantagenets kicked out. John also plays a big part in his own misfortunes. There's the fact that John doesn't really trust anyone and no one really trusts him. So as soon as Philip starts having success in Normandy, John's convincing himself that there's traitors everywhere out to betray him. John doesn't believe that the Norman lords could hold their lands against Philip. So John begins to hire mercenaries and he puts them in all of the castles. And medieval mercenaries are known for their fighting abilities, but also for their ruthlessness. And they have no loyalty to that area. So when John puts them in charge of the castles, they rob and extort the people in around the surrounding lands. That doesn't really influence trust in John's people, nor does John's aloofness and his refusal to glad hand people who need to be on his side. In 1203, before the fall of Chateau Gaillard, William Marshal could sense that things were going against them, and he tried to give John a firm talking to about him alienating people who should be his friends. And in William Marshal's biography, the conversation goes: "Sire, you have too few friends. If you challenge your enemies to fight you, you'll be crippled." John, he refuses to listen, and he tells Marshal that he simply doesn't care if people like him or not. He'll fight Philip on his own if he has to. Half of the cities in Normandy are on the verge of falling into Philip's troops, and Chateau Gaillard is buckling under the siege, but John refuses to back down. John tells Marshal, "If anyone is afraid, let him flee, for I'm not going anywhere for a year." But just a few weeks later, in December 1203, John suddenly up sticks in the middle of the night, and he creeps out of the castle they're all staying in, and he legs it to the coast and gets on a boat back to England. John leaves them a message saying that he's getting backup from the barons, but that becomes harder to believe when people soon discover that John has taken his young queen Isabella with him. John's brother Richard used to make fun of his little brother, saying that John wasn't a man to win anything if there was someone standing in his way. John is still in England by spring 1204 when Philip's men climbed up the toilet pipes and attacked from the inside of Chateau Gaillard. So what has John been doing in all of that time? John's doing all this big talk of going back to Normandy to save the day is beginning to turn into a whisper. All John has done so far is to give an order for wild animals to be caught in his English forests and shipped over along with hounds and birds of prey, so he has some beasts to hunt, torture, and kill when he finally returns. John gave that order on March the 6th, the very same day the last defences of Chateau Gaillard are destroyed, one of the most impressive fortresses in the medieval world, surrendered with only 100 defenders left inside. It's a crushing blow for the Plantagenet Empire. But there's an even bigger loss to come. Less than 4 weeks later, on the 1st of April 1204, one of the most strongest and fearless Plantagenets of them all dies. Eleanor of Aquitaine. And that is where I'm going to leave today's video, and you're just going to have to make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And that's it. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. I hope you're enjoying how I'm doing things, and I personally, I like all the gooey details. I like all the juicy bits, and sometimes that can get missed. So I really like to delve. I try to dig as far as I can so I can get all those juicy bits. Yes. And even though John's reign wasn't the longest, but he done so much in his reign, there's a lot to cover, and I want to make sure I get every single bit in there. So that's why I'm doing it in stages. I could do it in 1 hour and a half, 2 hour video, but I wouldn't be able to cram as much in as I'd like. So that's why I prefer breaking it down, and you can absorb the information a bit better. Well, I think that anyway. Like I said, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Please do subscribe, like and share, and keep being wonderful, because you're all bloody amazing, and don't let anyone tell you any different. And also, can I say a big thank you to all the new subscribers? Thank you. Hello. You're all amazing. And I will see you all soon for the next video. And yeah, I'll see you all soon. Take care.